thought I understood the world. I thought I understood right and wrong, war and peace, good and evil. But then I met a family in Gaza, a Muslim family, and everything changed. I sat in the rubble of what used to be their home, dust in the air, the echo of drones above, and yet they offered me tea. In the middle of their grief, their loss, their shattered windows and broken dreams, they welcomed me as though I were a long-lost friend. Their youngest boy, barely 10, showed me his drawings, tanks, birds, and a football. He wanted to be an artist. His sister, a doctor. Their father had lost his brother in a recent strike. Their mother had seen the maternity ward where she gave birth bombed just months earlier. And yet, they smiled. They told me, "We don't hate, we hope." Let that sink in. Not hate. Hope. After all they had suffered, after all they were still suffering. Let me be brutally honest. I used to watch the headlines and feel a flicker of sympathy. Then I'd move on. It was all just too far away, too complicated, too political. But this family made it personal. They are not collateral damage. They are not terrorists. They are not numbers in a news ticker. They are human beings. And what struck me, what tore a hole in the armor I didn't even know I had, was their refusal to surrender their humanity, even as the world strips it away, day by day, airstrike by airstrike. We in the West love to divide the world neatly, us versus them, civilized versus extremist, hero versus villain. But life, real life, is messier than that. We cry over one child in a war zone and look away from another simply because of where they're born or who bombed them. That's not just hypocrisy, it's moral failure. You see, it's easy to pick a side when you've never looked a grieving mother in the eyes as she cradles a photograph instead of a child. It's easy to shout defense from the comfort of your living room when someone else's home is the one being reduced to ash. But that family in Gaza changed me forever, because they reminded me that behind every wall, every label, every border and flag, there is a heartbeat, a dream, a child who just wants to draw birds instead of bombs. So here's my message, plain and simple. We must stop pretending that some lives matter more than others. We must stop sanitizing suffering depending on whose hands deliver it. And we must never forget that the people of Gaza, like that beautiful, brave family I met, are not asking for pity. They are asking to be seen, to be heard, to be treated as human. Is that really too much to ask? The power of one family's humanity amid horror lies in its ability to break through apathy. In Gaza, where airstrikes flatten neighborhoods and headlines reduce lives to numbers, it's easy for the world to look away. But then you meet a family, not in person, maybe just through a photo or a story, and suddenly the statistics start to bleed. This family was like that. A father, weathered but still gentle, a mother, quiet, watchful, fiercely protective of her children, 2 kids with wide eyes, too old for their age. Their home was gone, shelled, burned, scattered, but they hadn't left. They stayed, not because they had nowhere to go, but because they had something to protect, each other. Their survival wasn't just about staying alive, it was about holding on to grace when everything around them was trying to pull them into despair. That's the part that sticks. The image of a mother smoothing down her daughter's hair with hands covered in ash. The father carrying water across dangerous roads, not just for his family, but for a neighbor whose legs were gone. These aren't acts of defiance in the usual sense. They're quieter, deeper. They say, we are still human. We will not let this war take that from us. In the middle of the destruction, They lit a small fire with scraps of wood. The boy roasted a piece of bread. The little girl, maybe 6 or 7, drew in the dirt beside her a house, a tree, a stick figure smiling under a bright sun. It wasn't denial, it was resilience, a child's refusal to let the world decide her reality. She was saying, I still believe in warmth, in shelter, in joy. That drawing was more powerful than any political argument, because in that moment, it wasn't about territory or military strength. It was about survival of the spirit. The father, when he spoke, didn't sound angry. He sounded tired, but also composed. They think we are made of stone, he said, but we feel everything. We love, we cry, we bleed. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was asking to be seen. As a father, a husband, a man doing the best he can with what little he has, that kind of dignity in the face of everything designed to strip it away is disarming. It confronts the comfortable lie that some lives matter less. It pierces the narrative that paints people in Gaza as statistics or collateral damage. This family didn't ask for the war. They didn't start it, but they live every second of it. And in how they carry themselves, in how they care for each other when the world turns cold, they show a kind of courage we rarely talk about. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet insistence on staying human, even when the world around them forgets what that means. There was a time when the word Gaza would scroll across the screen and I wouldn't stop to look. Not because I didn't care, at least not consciously, but because it felt far away, complicated, endless, a problem with no solution. The images were always the same: rubble, smoke, wailing, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I told myself I'd seen it all before. I think a lot of people feel that way. We see it so much we see nothing, but looking back, that wasn't just fatigue, it was distance. It was a kind of emotional detachment, the kind that lets you move on with your day while others are digging through debris for their children. The first time I truly confronted that, I wasn't expecting to. It came in the form of a photo. A girl standing barefoot on concrete, her face covered in dust, clutching a pink plastic doll. Her eyes looked straight through the lens, straight through the screen, into mine. It wasn't horror in her face, it was something worse. A quiet, stunned kind of sadness, like she was still trying to understand how the world could let this happen. I froze. Because suddenly it wasn't a headline, it was a child. And I didn't know what to do with that. It made me reflect on how easy it is to form opinions from a distance. You hear arguments, you read tweets, you pick a side, but none of it prepares you for the moment when the abstraction turns into a person, a real breathing human being who didn't ask for any of this. That's what I had to confront. The part of myself that had been comfortable staying on the edges, the part that had decided somewhere along the way that it was enough to just be aware. That little girl, her face, her silence, made that impossible. She didn't say a word, but she shattered the wall I had built between my conscience and this conflict. I had to ask myself, honestly, why had I turned away for so long? Was it fear of not understanding? Was it the paralysis of helplessness? Or was it something deeper? A belief, however buried, that some suffering just isn't mine to carry. It's a hard thing to admit, but real change never starts with pride. It starts with honesty. That family in Gaza didn't just survive a bombing. They made me see myself. They showed me what I had been avoiding. And in doing so, they gave me something I didn't expect, a mirror. one that forced me to examine not just what I believed, but what I had chosen not to see. That moment didn't just challenge my perspective, it undid it. Because once you truly see someone's pain, once you let it in, it's impossible to go back to being comfortable in your silence. The child's perspective in times of war is one of the most hauntingly pure lenses through which we can view human suffering. Children, in their innocence, carry a kind of vulnerability that magnifies the cruelty of the world around them. But what struck me most in Gaza wasn't just the sheer loss children endured, but how they reacted to it. A small, powerful act, a piece of paper folded into a bird, a drawing of a house in the dust, reminds us that children are not just passive victims. They are still creators, still dreamers, still clinging to the tiny remnants of normalcy they've been allowed to keep. I remember seeing a photo of a boy, no older than 8, holding a scrap of bread, walking carefully between the collapsed buildings. His feet were bare. His expression wasn't the usual mask of fear I'd come to expect from war images. Instead, there was a quiet resolve, a kind of dignity I hadn't thought possible in a child his age. He wasn't running, wasn't crying, wasn't even asking for help. He was walking towards something, toward his family, towards survival. That moment struck me in a way I still don't fully understand. It wasn't that he was strong in the way we typically think of strength. It wasn't muscle or defiance. It was something quieter. It was the strength of a child who knew his family depended on him. It was the strength of someone who had no other choice but to keep moving forward. Another memory that stays with me is of a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. After the airstrikes had flattened much of her neighborhood, she sat on a pile of rubble, her legs crossed, drawing on a piece of broken wall with a piece of chalk. A house, a tree, a family, and beneath it, in Arabic, were 2 words: "We are still here." The simplicity of that statement was staggering. Amid the devastation, the fear, the destruction, she had chosen to draw a future, not just a present. That drawing didn't just show survival, it showed hope. It was a refusal to let everything around her destroy her spirit. Even in the rubble, even in the silence that followed the explosions, she wasn't going to let the world take her ability to imagine. The strength of that child, her ability to claim space in a world that had tried to erase her existence, was a message that was clear, simple, and unforgettable. Children, unlike adults, do not have the same filters. They don't understand the political rhetoric, the ideologies, or the justifications. They simply see the world for what it is, and what they see is often raw, unvarnished truth. What struck me so deeply about that little girl's drawing was not just her attempt to make sense of her shattered world, but her insistence on keeping it alive in her heart. She didn't ask for this war, she didn't start it, but she was forced to carry it, and yet even then she chose to hold on to hope. In these moments, the child's perspective isn't just about witnessing suffering, it's about showing us how to survive it when the world feels too heavy to carry, when every corner of it seems filled with pain. The children are the ones who keep reminding us that there is still room for wonder, for beauty, for the simple things that make life worth living. Their courage is a quiet force that challenges the rest of us to do better, to be better, to act with the same unwavering resilience they show, even when the world has given up on them. When we think about mercy and forgiveness, we often look to stories from the past to find examples of true moral strength. One such story that stays with me is the example set by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, during the conquest of Mecca. It's a moment that teaches us not just about forgiveness, but about the depth of human compassion in the face of betrayal, persecution, and war. The city of Mecca had rejected Muhammad, mocked him, persecuted his followers and even driven him and his people into exile. For years they suffered at the hands of the same people who now awaited defeat at the hands of the Muslims as they marched back into Mecca. It would have been easy for Muhammad to exact revenge, to demand justice for the years of hardship his people endured. After all, he had every reason to be angry, but instead, when he finally stood at the gates of Mecca, he chose mercy. He didn't command the Muslims to fight their former persecutors. He didn't call for retribution or declare that the city must pay for its transgressions. Instead, he offered forgiveness. He allowed the very people who had tried to destroy him and his followers to live without punishment. He said, "Go, for you are free." And with that, he broke the cycle of violence. Those who had once hated him were given the chance to live without fear, without the consequences of their past action. Muhammad could have turned the tide of history with bloodshed, but instead, he chose to show the world that true strength lies in forgiveness, in mercy, and in the ability to rise above the animosity that others may harbor against you. This example always resonates when I think of the family in Gaza I spoke about earlier. Here they were, surrounded by devastation, bombarded by forces they couldn't control, yet they didn't carry hatred. The father, who had lost so much, was still calm. He wasn't consumed by the anger one might expect from someone who had seen their home reduced to rubble, their family members in danger. He didn't see himself as a victim who had been wronged. He saw himself as a person who had to protect his family, to guide them through this moment without letting it destroy their hearts. This is what mercy looks like, not just in the grand gestures, but in the small, everyday decisions to not let hatred poison the soul. This father didn't have to forgive anyone directly, but in choosing not to lash out in anger, in choosing instead to be present, to care for his family and others, he reflected a similar kind of resilience and compassion. The Prophet Muhammad's example wasn't just a moment in history. It was a living, breathing testament to the idea that we can break the cycle of hatred and violence through the most human of responses, mercy. When you watch someone endure unimaginable suffering and still hold on to their humanity, it challenges the rest of us. It asks us if we too can live with the same grace. Can we hold on to our dignity even in the face of injustice? Can we, when everything seems stacked against us, still choose mercy over revenge, understanding over bitterness? The Muslim family in Gaza reminded me of this in a way that is both painful and profound. Their strength was not just in their survival, but in how they survived, with their hearts intact, ready to rebuild, ready to love. And in that, they echoed a lesson as old as time, that even in our darkest hours, we still have a choice. The cost of looking away is something we often don't think about until it's too late. It's easy to convince ourselves that we're powerless to affect change when we see something horrific unfold on the news or social media. The images are distant, removed from our immediate reality. It's tempting to slip into the comfort of feeling that the suffering of others doesn't require our attention. After all, we have our own lives to live, our own problems to manage. But when we turn a blind eye, we are not just passively observing, we are complicit in the silence that allows injustice to persist. I realized this when I saw the family in Gaza. They were not part of the same political or cultural world as me. They didn't live in the same country, didn't share the same experiences. Their struggles seemed like something out of my reach, too complex, too layered with history and geopolitics. I found myself falling into the trap of thinking that the situation was just too large to comprehend. So, like many others, I distanced myself. I read the headlines, scrolled past the images of destruction, the grief, and the cries for help, and justified my inaction by telling myself I could do nothing. What could I do from thousands of miles away? What impact could one voice have against such overwhelming violence? But in seeing the family, particularly the little girl drawing pictures on the ruins of her home in the midst of chaos, I realized the lie I had been telling myself. This wasn't just a tragedy happening over there. This was the reality of human beings. These were people with stories, with hopes, with lives that deserved recognition. In my silence, in my reluctance to engage, I had allowed myself to become part of the system that keeps us separated from the suffering of others. I distanced myself because facing their pain would force me to confront my own. And when we face that pain, we're forced to act. We can no longer hide behind the excuse of, I don't know what to do, or it's too complicated. The cost of looking away is that we lose our humanity. We stop seeing people as people and start seeing them as statistics, as numbers, as faceless others whose suffering is too distant for us to care about. This is why it's so dangerous to look away, because when we do, we allow the machinery of oppression, injustice, and cruelty to keep grinding. Unchecked, we give permission for these things to continue. The suffering of that family in Gaza and countless others didn't stop because I ignored it. It continued unabated, but the real damage was done in my heart, in my refusal to see them as human beings, and in my unwillingness to admit that by turning the page, by changing the channel, by not speaking out, I was in some small way saying that their pain didn't matter. The cost of looking away is losing that connection, losing that basic human empathy that binds us all together. When we choose to look away, we not only rob ourselves of the opportunity to make a difference, but we also rob others of the chance to be seen, to be heard, and to be helped. Silence is not neutral. It's a choice to allow the status quo to persist. It's a choice to remain passive in the face of suffering. And the cost of that silence is too great for any of us to ignore. Hope's often seen as an abstract idea, something that exists in the background of our lives when things are going well, but easily forgotten in the face of overwhelming adversity. Yet it's during the darkest times that hope becomes more than just a feeling, it becomes a lifeline. The family in Gaza, in the midst of their unimaginable suffering, didn't just survive. They continued to hold on to a vision of life beyond the destruction. A life where hope was still possible. This refusal to surrender to despair, this quiet yet undeniable insistence on hope, is what we need to remember, especially when it feels like there is no end to the pain. It's easy to look at a situation like Gaza's, years of conflict, loss and grief, and think that hope has no place there. But when I watched the father walk through the ruins with his children, when I saw the little girl drawing on the ground, or the boy holding a piece of bread and walking with purpose, I realized something. Hope doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the small, everyday acts of survival that hope takes root. The family didn't give up. They didn't stop. They didn't let the world define them solely by their suffering. Their resilience was not born out of an absence of pain, but in spite of it. Hope, as this family demonstrated, is an act of defiance. In a place where it would be so easy to fall into the trap of anger, bitterness, or despair, they chose to continue living with purpose. When their house was gone, they rebuilt their lives from the wreckage. When their future seemed uncertain, they clung to the certainty of family. They didn't give up because they understood that survival wasn't just about making it through each day. It was about choosing to live with dignity, to find meaning in the smallest things, even in the darkest times. It was this hope that ultimately moved me, seeing them carry on, not in denial, but in full awareness of the reality around them, made me question my own attitude toward adversity. How often do I, and many others, let the weight of the world's problems drown out the quiet call for action, for compassion? How often do we sit in our comfort, shielded from suffering, and tell ourselves that the world's pain is just too big for us to fix? This family didn't have the luxury of thinking that way. They had no choice but to act, to keep moving forward, to continue being human in a world that wanted to strip them of their humanity. Their hope wasn't just for themselves, it was a gift to the rest of us. It showed that no matter how dark the world may become, there is always room for light. Even the smallest flicker of hope can guide us through the darkest moments. We don't have to solve everything, but we can take inspiration from those who do not give up. And maybe, just maybe, by holding on to that flicker, we too can make a difference. We too can carry that hope forward, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us. Because if they can keep going, so can we.